All right, so now we're looking at slides 51 through 57. This is when we're going to talk about gas exchange. So getting into the microscopic portions in the alveoli to start looking how this works. So alveolar gas exchange, they're like tube-like organs of the respiratory system, transport air in and out of the lungs. This is the conducting zone. The alveoli, which are at the end, are the sites of the vital process of gas exchange between the air and the blood. So if you look over here on the right, you'll see a picture, and you'll see all these little holes around here, right? This is so that each one of these little sacs, these alveoli, are connected with each other and allow for the whole area to be used. So the microscopic air sacs at the ends of the alveolar ducts are called alveoli. They have these alveolar pores which permit air to pass from one alveolus to another, providing alternate air pathways. And in here, you're going to have these things called alveolar macrophages that help clean the alveoli. Remember, macrophage is a monocyte, right? So these are the monocytes that have left the circulation. Now they've taken up residence in the lungs, and they're called alveolar macrophages. And they're just there, big eaters. Remember, macrophage, big eater. They're just there to kind of do away with the debris that's around there. And so the majority of the alveoli consist of a layer of simple squamous epithelium. And these are referred to as type 1 cells. But there is a type 2 cell, and I talked about this on one of the previous videos. These cells are what secrete pulmonary surfactant. We talked about surfactant, how it is a chemical that's released to help weaken what is called surface tension. So these type 2 cells are the cells that are not active on premature babies. They generally don't become active until about the time of the normal birthday. So again, what they do is, if I've got a piece of wax paper and I put a drop of water on it, it'll bead up like this because the surface tension, the molecules at the surface of the water are going to have a tighter grip on each other than the molecules in the middle, so they will pull together, so they have a lot of elastic basic recoil. And so if we didn't have surfactant, the surface tension on this, if this was a layer of simple squamous epithelium, right, the alveoli, this would pull it in on itself and would collapse the lungs. So again, type 2 cells are the ones that secrete pulmonary surfactant, and that is the type of cell that is not active on a premature baby. So gas exchange happens between the alveolar air and the blood, occurs through what's called the respiratory membrane, and there are 4 layers to it. I'm going to have a layer of cells that are simple squamous cells of the alveoli. And then I'm going to have a basement membrane that is down here. All right? Now I can use other pins, and I'll use blue. I'm going to have another basement membrane right here, and then just on the other side of the basement membrane, I'm going to have another layer of simple squamous cells. I probably should have done these in reverse, but another layer of simple squamous cells which are from the blood vessel. So there are 4 layers, one layer here of cells, and then 2 layers that are the basement membrane. So there are 4 layers of the respiratory membrane. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, simple squamous on the alveolar wall, simple squamous of the capillary wall, and then the 2 basement membranes. You can see it here. Again, the respiratory membrane consists of the walls of the alveolus and the capillary, and their 2 fused basement membranes. That's what this section right here is shown all blown up here. And so capillary wall, alveolar wall, 2 basement membranes right there. Now, the respiratory membrane is incredibly thick. This is an electron microscope picture of red blood cells squeezing one at a time as they move through this capillary. And so I'm going to have a wall here of the capillary. I've got the wall here of the alveoli, and then our two basement membranes are so small you can't see them there. And so as they move through, these cells, we'll say they're moving this way across, and they just got here, so they've got a lot of CO2 and a little bit of oxygen. So I'll draw it kind of small here. In the velar space, I've got a lot of oxygen and a little bit of CO2. And so because things want to move towards from high concentration to low concentration, like we talked about with the pressures. So I've got a lot of oxygen here, a little oxygen here, so the oxygen is going to want to jump across. And vice versa, since I've got a lot of carbon dioxide here and a little bit here, the carbon dioxide is going to jump this way. So that's how that works. Now the cell membranes, as it says, are permeable to gases. Molecules diffuse from regions of higher concentration towards regions of lower concentration. Just like if I've got a ball up on a hill and I push it, it's going to want to go down. It takes energy to push it up. And so this is what happens. I've got high concentration of oxygen in the alveolar space and low concentration in the blood. So the molecules move from high concentration to low concentration. So that in the process of respiration, gases diffuse along areas of higher partial pressure to areas of lower partial pressure. Again, that's the same. That's just saying the concentration thing in a different way. Now, the way this works is the respiratory membrane is set up where it is very thin, right? And that there's a long space where that capillary runs across it. So there's things that will affect, and it says down here, factors that affect diffusion across the respiratory membrane. All right, so increased diffusion occurs when there is more surface area. So if I am sitting there and I'm saying that this is the alveoli and then this is the capillary as it runs across, if I drew another one that's like this, since this one, number one, has more surface area, I'm going to have greater gas exchange at this one. All right, I hope that makes sense. The other one is a shorter distance. So like if I have, again, going back to having two things here, if this is the respiratory membrane, and then the other side over here, I have some kind of disease where I've got the respiratory membrane here and then another layer of, we'll say, tar if you're a smoker. Because this is a thicker wall than this, I have decreased the ability for diffusion on this side because it's a thicker area. I'm not worried about greater gas solubility because we're only worried about the two, but the other one is steeper partial pressure gradient. That's why if you see someone in an athletic event where they come and they put the oxygen mask on, since I'm breathing in air with a greater oxygen content, I'm going to have a much higher diffusion rate because I have more oxygen. It causes a steeper difference between the concentrations. That's what it means with that. So decreased diffusion occurs when decreased surface area and harm to the respiratory membrane. Now, again, the same thing, if I go back to this steeper partial pressure gradient, the reason that people will get altitude sickness is the higher up you go in the altitude, the less oxygen is in the air. The air is quote unquote thinner. And so there's less diffusion and you can die from that. Or at least, at the very least, you become very sick, but you can die from that. So those are the things that affect it. And so lastly, we're going to look at just the schematic of things. Again, I'm not interested in you knowing the numbers, but I want you to see oxygen has a much higher difference, a much higher partial pressure gradient than carbon dioxide. As the blood is flowing through this way, carbon dioxide, the partial pressure is 45 millimeters of mercury, and it's 40 millimeters of mercury in the air of the alveoli. So it's going to go, the carbon dioxide is going to go into the alveolus to blow out, and you'll see that by the time it gets through, we will have reached equilibrium from the beginning. Then we look at oxygen. Oxygen has a much lower partial pressure in the blood than it does in the air we're breathing. And so I'm going to have a large jump of a large amount of oxygen that's going to jump across, and you'll see that as the time it gets through, it will have reached equilibrium. And so this is the factor that's driving the gas exchange. So it is the difference in the partial pressures of gases between the alveoli and the capillary. So that's the explanation of that. I hope it makes sense.